Okay. So we're up to on we actually finished Ches Amud Aleph. We're going to do Ches Amud Beis today. We're going to start with 8b. But let's just first review for a minute. We're middle of the discussion. The Gemara talked about a koi or kvi. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but it's a animal which we're not sure whether it's a chaya. A chaya means an undomesticated animals that you would require to cover the blood. And it may be an animal, a tame animal. A tame animal, you don't have to cover the blood. So the Bryce stated that you're not allowed to shechten on Yontif because if you are going to shecht it, maybe it is an undomesticated. We don't know what the koi is. Maybe it is a chaya, and that would require covering. And on Yontif, you can't cover it, so don't shecht it, it says. So that's one thing. Then the Brisa says further, but if you did shecht it, yeah, the Brisa said, then don't cover its blood because maybe it's a behemoth that doesn't require, and you're not allowed to move the sand to cover the blood because you don't really have to do it because it is maybe it's a behemoth. So the Gemara asked the question. So if we're going to say that we said before that you can bring in a full, Rabbi Yehuda said you can bring in a full bucket of sand and you can do whatever you need. So the Gemara is asking if you have sand that is hanging around there, which is ready for everything. So who cares that it's a behemoth? Why don't you cover it because you have sand already there? Uh, so the Gemara says you're asking, why don't you cover it up with the bucket full of, why don't you cover it up, the Gemara says, with the ashes of the oven or with a shovel that is a ribbon stuck in the ground, which technically you're allowed to do. So the answer is he doesn't have it. So there's also, the Gemara says, he doesn't have this bucket of sand. So it's not a question on Rabbi Yehuda who says that you can use, if you have a bucket of sand, you can use wherever you need. It's not a question. So you're talking about you don't have. So, uh, so the Gemara says, so then why do we, if you're saying that he doesn't have available sand, so even if we knew that it is a chaya, you're still not allowed to because Beis Hillel in order to in order to they prohibit if it's without, in other words, if there's no shovel stuck in the ground, you're not allowed to. So if you're saying that it's not available, then it's not only because you don't know if it might be an animal, even if you know for sure it's a chaya or a bird, which you have to cover, you're not allowed to do it. So the Gemara answers, "Lo miboyi ka'amar," which means, so means that certainly even uh, for sure a regular chaya that requires kisui, he's not allowed to, not able to. And he says not only a doubtful, but even a vad limboy, because maybe maybe you should allow a koi because since it may not need kisui dam because it may be an animal. So maybe we should allow for a suffix shecht it and don't cover the blood because you're not sure that it's really required to cover the blood. So therefore, komashlo. So what does the Mishnah tell you? So I mean, this Raisa tells you that you should not do it. Okay, that's what we finished the Gemara last time. So now, frag the Gemara. But wait a minute. You're saying that there is no available sand to cover it. That's what you're saying. Otherwise, you would allow to cover it. Frag die Gemara, wo mit der Kotoni is safer, but in the second part, it says you're not allowed to shecht it, but it says, V'im shochtoi ein mechasin es domoi. If you did shecht the koi, that suffix, the animal which is a suffix, behem, a suffix chaya, if you did shecht it, then you can't cover the blood. So, if you don't have, if it's talking about a situation where you don't have blood to cover, if you don't have sand to cover it, why do we have to tell you that you can't cover the blood? Miklal, it must be that with the Isla Askinon, that we're talking about that he has sand. You wouldn't have to say, let's do the Rashi, but we can understand. It says that when you have a koi or kvi, that animal, don't shecht it. Itzrich, we needed to tell you, don't shecht it. Why would you think that you should be allowed to shecht it if you're not even allowed to shecht? Avadai chaya, avadai oif, you're not allowed to shecht. Why would you think? Maybe because we're not sure that you have to cover it. Because maybe it's not even an animal, maybe it's not even a chaya. So maybe let's shecht it. So you're saying, okay, no, you're not allowed to shecht it, even though you're not going to have anything to eat for Yom Tov, only what you have is the kvi, and we're not going to shecht it because maybe it's a chaya, and you're not going to be able to cover it. Fine. Elo sefer de katoni, but what does it say in the sefer? That if you shecht it, ein mechasim, you're not going to let it cover it. So the question is, either Leslie, if you're talking about that there is nothing there to cover it with, that chodam mahani lechasis, he has one of these mentioned, either the Efer or the Kupa or there's something there. He doesn't have to cover it. So why does it not? Why does he have to tell you that what? That you're not allowed to go and dig a sand to cover up? For sure. Even if you need to do the mitzvah, for sure, you're not allowed to cover with sand that is not prepared. Sofik mebayi. So do we need to tell you that when you're not even sure that you're not allowed to do it? So Mele, the Mishnah that talks about shechting it, and you might think that shecht it and don't cover because maybe you're not sure you need to cover it. It may not be a chaya. Okay, so that's a chiddush. But now once you shecht it, you're telling me you're not allowed to cover it. And if we're talking about that you have one of those available sands that we discussed, even either you had the kupa or you had the afer or you had the shovel stuck in, and still we're saying, and you don't have that, so why does he have to tell me? You're not allowed to dig to cover, even if we know for sure it's a chaya, and a you're not allowed to dig. So from this we can therefore derive, it's talking about the Islay, that his take has the legabe vadai mechasim. So then you can cover by a vadai because you have one of these special prepared sands that you can cover. V'ashmu inon the suffix loy, and he teaches us, he comes to teach us that if it's a suffix, that when there is a doubt, you're not allowed to do it, you can't do it. So, The question is, V'kashilon amai ein mechasim. So why can't you really cover it? Iked Rabbi Yehuda, or like Rabbi Yehuda that says you can bring in a kupa with offer. Why don't you cover it? Ib efer akira, or why don't you use the ashes of the stove? In other words, what the Gemara proved that you have to be talking about that you have these some prepared. Because if you didn't have it prepared and you have to dig the Mishnah, the Beitzah wouldn't tell you a chiddush that by Yaku you can't cover even a Vadai. So it has to be talking about B'di Isla. And for some reason, you're not allowed to do it for a Suffolk, but you can do it for a Vadai. But according you just said, Rabbi Yehuda or Eifo, you should be able to do it. So the question is, why can't you cover if you have sand available? The Gemara proves you have sand available. If you have sand available in one of those situations, why don't we cover? Why aren't we allowed to cover? So Elam Rabba. So Rabba gives another answer. Rabba says, even though we said before, Efer Kira Muchan, it's prepared to be used for something that you know for sure you have to cover, like the blood of a chaya. So for that, we're saying that people have in mind that ashes should be used for that. But people don't have in mind for something which is not for sure need to cover, such as a koi or the kvi or this questionable. That still remains muktzah for that. How that works exactly, the Gemara is going to challenge this. We'll see in a minute. El Omar Rabba. But let's see what Rabba says. But Rabba said, Efer Kira Muchan Levadai. The Efer of the Kira is ready, is considered not muktzah for something which is certainly needs kisuidam, a chaya, a bird. But ve'emuchan l'sofik, but it's not considered prepared for something which is not for sure, which is, in this case, which is the kui. The kui, we're not sure that it needs cover. It doesn't cover that. Rashi explains. Muchan levada ve'ein muchan l'sofik. So Rashi says, Kosalka daitoch, doch kamar. What the Gemara is thinking, the Gemara is going to change this later on, that what he's saying is, Afal gav de daite l'chol mili, even though in mind, he asks for everything. He thinks the ashes of my fire should be used for whatever I need. But hachnososei moyil levada ve'enam el sofik. But still, this bringing it in the case of the kupa, if you bring it in, it only helps for when it's a vadai. It doesn't help for a suffix. But that doesn't, why would it not help if it's not muktzah anymore? If the person has it, that he's going to use it for whatever he needs it. So it's not muktzah. How could you say that it's only not muktzah for a vadai? The person says, I'm going to use it for wherever I need it. And if it needs to cover a suffix, he'll cover it. Uparchinum, that's the Gemara's question. The kivon didaita iluha ilove, since he has in mind, I'm going to use the ashes or the kupa, I'm going to use it for whatever I need. Umshum de leko, and there's no such a thing that you designated not to use it because you have in mind that you're going to use it for whatever you're going to need. Sofik my time machasinon. Why can't you cover up? Why can't you use it when it's not a certain requirement to cover? It's a kui. It's an animal. Why should you use it? You're gonna say why? Mishum dekavet guma. Is it because don't cover it because you're making a hole? Is that the reason? For the Gemara, l'sofik my time aloi. Why can't you use the sand from the kupa or the afer of the kira? Why can't you use it to cover the blood of this kui? Is the ka'avid guma is because you're making a hole? Vadainami ka'avid guma. If the issue is because you're making a hole and you're building in the ground, that way it's usur. So why is it only an issue when we're talking about a kui, a suffix, even a vada? You shouldn't be allowed to do it because you're building. And the reason that we explained before, why don't we consider it building? Elo kid Rabbi Abba. It goes like we explained before Rabbi Abba. And Rabbi Abba says that vadai, my time is shoris. What is the reason when you know for sure it needs covering of the blood? It's a chaya. Why do you permit it? Kid Rabbi Abba, as Rabbi Abba explained. The Omar Le'il, who said earlier, Makalkalu Potraleh, because this is not considered building, this is considered ruining it. And if you're Makalkal, you're Potter. So if you're a suffix, why shouldn't you be able to take and cover it? Making a hole is not is a non-issue because you're ruining it, and we said before that Rabbi permits when you're ruining it. And the Gemara continues to go through. We already had all this before. Elo Sofik, my timer. But what are you going to say? The reason why you can't, when you're not sure, not to cover it, Dilma of it Kitisha, because he might grind it up, because it's going to be a chunk. It's going to grind it up. Dilma Kovet Kitisha, Zoktrashi, Garcinon, Shemo Yehushom Rigovim, V'yach Tishem. There might be chunks over there. He's going to grind it down. He's going to be grinding on Yontif. We're not allowed to do that. So if that's your worry, so even if it's a definite chaya that needs kisui, why don't you geyser because of kitisha that you might grind it down? And the Gemara answers like this. Rashi gives you the Gemara's answer over here already. Most of the time, you don't need to grind it down. You can just dig it up, and there was a shovel there already. You can take it out without grinding it. There goes the Rabbanan Mishum Ketisha. The Rabbanan did not worry about it. They didn't make a decree that you might come to grind it up. The nami also lidei kach, because even if it should come to this that they'll ground it up, lav isure de raisa ika. You will still not be violating a Torah prohibition. If you grind up the chunks of earth to cover the blood, you will not be violating a Torah command. Why? The osi esa de chisou ba'afar v'dochi loisase melocha. The positive mitzvah that the Torah says you shall cover the blood in sand overrides and pushes away the prohibition of not doing work on Yom Tov. The Kaimelon Beperikamo di Yevomis, as we have the halacha in the first perik of Yevomis, of Dal David Baal Dal Olive, as doiche loisasa. The esa can override the loisasa. But vadai, so this thing more explaining. I'll now see the more. Vadai ki ovid kitisha, when it's for sure a requirement, if you are going to be grinding it up, osi ese v'doiches loisase, then the positive mitzvah of covering in the blood overrides the loisase. And therefore, you're not going to be violating anything. And the Gemara says, hey, wait a minute. when does a positive mitzvah override a prohibition if at the time that you're doing the mitzvah, the prohibition is being violated? In our case, when you're grinding the sand, you're not doing the mitzvah yet. You're preparing the sand. Later on, you use the sand to cover the blood. So the violation of Yom Tov is when you're grinding it. The mitzvah is taking place. When are we allowed to? When do we say the rule that the positive mitzvah overrides the prohibition if it happens at the same time? As for example, Eimer damrinon ausi esse v'doichas leisese kigoin mila b'tzaras. When do we say that an esse will override the leisese? Is, for example, making circumcision, and there is a tzaraz there. Like this, you're not allowed to cut away a tzaraz. What happened on that piece of skin that you're cutting down? There's tzaraz there. So it turns out that you're violating the prohibition of not cutting the leprosy at the same time you're doing the mitzvah of Bris Milah. You're doing the Milah. That's a case where it happens at the same time. Or the other case would be wearing shatnas in the tzitzis by the mitzvah of tzitzis. So over there, because you're doing the mitzvah at the time that you're wearing the shatnas, that's why it overrides it. But in our case, it doesn't fit because you're grinding the earth now, and then later on you're going to cover it later. It doesn't override in that case. Again, Zokt Rashi, Mila b'tzaras, the case of Mila b'tzaras, Diksiv, Hishomer b'nega tzaras. The pasuk says you got to be careful with the nega, with the leprosy, that you can't cut it down. The Tanya, because we learned in the Beitzah that bekoitzet b'harosei hakosov medaber, that this pasuk is talking about one who is cutting down the baheres. Torah says you can't do that. The Tanya b'Gemara, and we learned in the Gemara, the imloi heavy clay. That's the perek. In Masechta Shabbos Kuf Lamed Beis Omed Beis, it says Yilma Mel Besar Orlose. We learn from the pasuk Yilma Besar Orlose. I feel I think that's Rabbi Lezer de Mila. They call it Imloi Hevi Keli. That's what the Masechta is called. That's what the perek is called in Masechta Shabbos over there. And Perek Rabbi Lezer de Mila. So we learn from the pasuk Yimel Besar Orlosei. So it says from the pasuk is that Afilu b'mokim b'heres yikitz. But basically, that even if it is, the Torah says, circumcise him, that even if you're taking off the b'heres, it's cut it off. So the esse is doiche, the mitzvah bris is doiche, the loisase, or the hishomer, which is a loisase b'negatzaras. Inami, sadin b'tzitzis. The same thing is what we're talking about. You have a garment, a sheet, and you put it tzitzis. Inami tzitzis b'kelayim. That is tzitzis when you wearing it with mixed of wool and linen. The pasuk says, "Lo silba shatnes." The Torah says, "Don't wear shatnes, a mixture of wool and linen." V'samich lei, and then in this pasuk next to it, it says, "Gedilim taselecha." You should make yourself tzitzis; those fringes you should make. So what do we learn out? That the bishas milah. When you're doing the mitzvah of milah or the mitzvah of wearing the talits, me'eker lav u'mekayim esa. You are uprooting the lav and you're filling an essa. You're wearing shatnez, but you're doing tzitzis. You're cutting off a nega, but you're doing a bris milah. But the essa over here, kshuhu koitesh, when he is grinding over belav, that's when he's violating. But the essay doesn't fulfill until he covers. So over here we don't say that the essa will override the loisa says. So we will not allow him on Yontif to go and grind up the earth, crush it up, because he's not doing a mitzvah then. The mitzvah is going to be later. The beidno, the kamakar lav komukim laeso. Over there, when the time that he is uprooting the lav, he's fulfilling the esa. The time that the lav is being uprooted, he's not doing an esa. He's just grinding the earth now. Why would you be allowed? The Gemara says because it's a vadai, he can do it. Why would you allow him? He's not an esa. The Gemara says no. That's not a question. Holy kashi. We're talking about the Kotish Komachase. He's not going to, we're not worried that he's going to be grinding it up before. He's grinding it up as he's covering. So he's crumpling it up in his hands so that it covers. So the chashash, why don't we, when we're talking about a vadai, which you have to cover, and since even if you did grind it, you wouldn't be violating, because if during the time that you're crushing it up, you're covering, and therefore that's why we allow it by a vadai, but by a suffix we won't allow that, because there's not a definite vadai. But the Gemara is not yet, the Gemara is not satisfied. The Gemara is saying you can't say that you're allowed to grind it because you're fulfilling a mitzvah to override the Yom Tov, because Yom Tov actually has a positive mitzvah as well. If it's only a positive mitzvah against the negative, so the positive will override it. So Yom Tov being, if Yom Tov was only a lo saseh and covering the blood was an essa, so the essa could override the lo saseh. But it happens to be that Yom Tov has an essa too. One essa cannot override of covering the blood, the essa and the lo saseh from Yom Tov. And the Gemara says, so if in the end we have a problem, Yom Tov essa, the lo saseh. It's both. It's a essa together with lo saseh. Vein essa doichas, lo saseh ve'essa. You cannot override the lo saseh and essa. Where is the essa of Yom Tov? Because the pasuk says by Yom Harishon Shabbosin, the mashma shveis, it's mashma you have to rest. So the Gemara, Elam Rova, Efer Kira Daitoi Levadai, Ve'ein Daitoi Lesafik. He says different. The Gemara said before that since you have it in mind that you're going to use it, what difference for what? Whether it's a suffix or vadai. Here, Rava qualifies. He says, when you have ashes in the oven, you're thinking in mind to use it if you need it for sure, but not if you may need to use for suffix. Main data the suffix. Hilkach isra muktzah ika. There is muktzah. What's the Efer? Vuadin Rav Yehuda, the same thing is bringing in the bucket full of sand. It's also, you only bring it in for things that you know for sure that you use it, but things that'll happen, a suffix, you don't bring it in. And Rava goes according to his reasoning elsewhere. So Rashi says, the Omar, he says, Misha daitoi Levadai leromi anafshe laazmuni limidi desofik. One whose mind is for a definite does not have on himself to prepare it for something which is not sure. Which means, yes, I have in mind for things that sure need sand, but I don't have in mind, oh, maybe something may need it as a doubt. He gives you an example. The Omar Rava. Rava says as follows. Hichnis ofor lechasis boitzoyo. He brought in sand that he wants to cover up the tzoya, the excrement the baby will make on the floor. Rashi says, "Hichnis offer lechasis boitzoyo beyomtiv." You could, if you brought in from before uh, Yom Tov to cover the dung of the baby on the floor. He's worried that he's going to, make number two in front of him on Yom Tov, in front of his face. So he brings in sand so that he can cover it. Mutter lechasis beitam tzipar, he's allowed to cover with it the blood of the bird, meaning if he shechts a bird and he needs sand to cover it, he brought it in for that purpose. He can still use for the bird. So Rashi, muter lechaz edam tzipor sheyesh lo lishche b'yom tov, because he can shechter in yom tov. The kivan sheis mine lesofik koski levade, since he prepared it for a suffix, certainly he prepares it for a vadai, which means the baby, whether the baby is going to make or not, he doesn't know. But the bird that he wants to use, that's for sure. So that's considered. But what happens if he brought it in for dam tzipper to cover for the bird? Also chases b'itzoya. Then you're not allowed to use it to cover it up for the babies, what the baby made. Also chases b'itzoya. He cannot. You cannot use that sand, my timer. The blood of the bird, he knows for sure he's going to shecht it. And he's going to need to cover it. But when you talk about the tzoya, whether it's going to happen in somewhere where it's going to be disgusting, but when he brought it in, he had for the shore, for the blood of the tzipor, but not for the baby's making over there, because he didn't know if it's going to be.
But is it still muktzah? I mean, for the baby,
No,
no matter
well,
what the
if
use
you
is,
prepared it, it's not muktzah. Well, if you prepared it for the bird, it's going to be muktzah for the baby, according to that opinion. Nahar b'lo yamari, the nahar b'lo, they say, afilu hichnis offer lechasis b'dam tzipper, even if you brought it in to cover the blood of a tzipper, mutar lechasis b'tzoya, you can still cover the tzoya, the babies, what it made. Why? Dr. Rashi, mutar, kiven the azmane. Once you prepared, you prepared. This is also almost sure that the baby is going to do its thing over there. So he said, you prepare it. Narbeloy Amri b'Sanhedrin mefarish the Rabbi Bar Bribi. Narbeloy, that's the Gemara says is Rabbi Bar Bribi. He's just telling who Narbeloy is. So the Gemara Amri b'Marova. So they said in Eretz Yisrael in the West, Pligi bo Rabbi Yosi Bar Choma v'Rabbi Zera, that this is an argument between Rabbi Yosi Bar Choma and Rabbi Zera. Ba'amri lo Rabbi Bereid Rabbi Yosi Bar Choma v'Rabbi Zera. Other people, it's Rabbi Bereid, Rabbi and Rabbi Zera. These two, which are the two? Chad Omar Koi Harihu Kitzoya. One says it's like Tzoya, which means Hamachnis ofor lechasis by tsoya mutaloi lechasis by dam koi. The zeb is a suffix. They're both a suffix. So he if he brings in to cover tsoya, which is a suffix, you can also use it for a suffix because also the tsoya is a suffix. It's not like tsoya. V'amachnis ofer lechasis tsoya, also lechasis by dam koi. He's not allowed to cover the blood of the koi. The koi legabe tsoya kisofik legabe vadai. Because a koi is more of a suffix. A baby is definitely going to do its thing. The tsoyas tinuk, Rashi says, kicho krev levadai. So you cannot cover the blood of the koi, even though you brought it in for the tsoya, which is not. And the Gemara says tistayim. So you can make a proof that the Rava. So we had who the Omar koyar kitsoya that he equals it to tsoya. This time the Rava the Omar tsoya kisofik koy mutar basmona tsoya. He is the one that says that tsoya is like a suffix. Not korov levadai, and the koi mutar basmona tsoya. If you prepare for tsoya, you can use for the koi too. That's Rabbi. Omar Rava hichnis ofor lechasis by tsoya. Mutar lechasis by dam tzipor. If you brought in sand to cover tzoy, you can cover dam tzipor. Dam tzipor also lechasis by tzoy, but the dam tzipor you cannot be covering the tzoy. Alma suffix. So you see that a koi is a suffix. I'm sorry. I mean that tsoya, you can't cover it if you brought it in for the tzam tzibur. You're still not allowed to cover tsoya. Is a simon that tsoya is a suffix. And because tsoya is a suffix, that's why you cannot, that's why it's like koi. And if you bring in offer to cover tsoya, you can still cover up the koi. The Gemara says, tistayim. It's a good proof. Okay, let's leave it over here. And we have still one more small piece of Gemara. But we'll finish next time. Bezras Hashem. Hopefully on time. Okay, let's leave it over here.
Anytime we get with you is good.
What? What are you saying?
Anytime we get with you is good.
Thank you so much.
Anytime that we...
Okay, thank you. Okay, have a good night.
Rabbi.
Have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you.